My true story from Michigan. I helped them for years. Then they said, "You do nothing." My dear friends, I'm writing this letter from my little apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I've been living for the past 2 years. It's quiet here, peaceful in a way I haven't felt in decades. The morning sun streams through my kitchen window as I sip my coffee, and for the first time in 40 years, I don't have to worry about anyone else's schedule but my own. Let me tell you my story. It's one of love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and ultimately, finding myself again after losing everything I thought mattered most in this world. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, and I'm 75 years old. For most of my adult life, I was the cornerstone of my family, the one everyone turned to when life got complicated, when money ran short, when marriages fell apart, or when they simply needed someone to care for their children while they lived their lives and chased their dreams. It all started so innocently, the way these things always do. When my daughter Sarah had her first baby, Tommy, she was only 22 and completely overwhelmed. Her husband Mark worked long hours at the Ford plant, pulling double shifts to make ends meet, and Sarah was struggling with what we now know was severe postpartum depression. I remember that cold February morning when she called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Mom," she choked out between tears, "I don't know what I'm doing. I can't stop crying. I'm scared I'm going to hurt the baby. Can you please help me? I don't have anyone else." Of course I could help. What kind of mother would I be if I didn't? I was 53 then, recently widowed after losing my beloved Harold to pancreatic cancer just 8 months earlier. My own grief was still so raw, so consuming, that some days I could barely get out of bed. But caring for my precious grandson gave me purpose when I felt like I had none left in this world. I moved into Sarah and Mark's spare bedroom temporarily to help with night feedings, diaper changes, and daily care. I told myself it would just be for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, until Sarah got back on her feet. Temporary stretched into months, then years. By the time little Tommy was walking and talking, I was still there, and somehow I'd become not just helpful, but absolutely essential to their daily survival. When Sarah had her second child, Emma, 2 years later, I was still living in that same spare bedroom. By then, I wasn't just helping anymore. I was running the entire household. I cooked every single meal, did all the laundry, cleaned the house from top to bottom, managed the grocery shopping, and watched the children while Sarah went back to work at the insurance office. I told myself this was what families did for each other, that this was love in action. But it wasn't just Sarah who needed me. My son Michael faced his own devastating struggles when his wife Angela left him for her boss when their daughter Lily was just 5 years old. The divorce was brutal and messy, leaving Michael emotionally shattered and financially strained. Without a moment's hesitation, I opened my arms and my home to them both. Michael moved into my basement with little Lily, and suddenly I was caring for 3 grandchildren under one roof. My days began at 5 in the morning and ended well past midnight. I packed lunch boxes, braided hair, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, drove to soccer practice, dance recitals, and birthday parties. I was the one who stayed up all night when they had fevers, who made elaborate birthday cakes from scratch, who listened to their problems and dried their tears when their hearts were broken. The years blurred together in an endless cycle of giving. I used my entire inheritance from Harold, $75,000 that was supposed to secure my retirement and allow me to travel, to pursue hobbies, to enjoy my golden years, to help with mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills, and college funds. When Mark lost his job for 8 months during the recession, I covered their groceries, utility bills, and house payment. When Michael needed a down payment for a house so he could give Lily stability, I gave him my entire emergency savings account. I never asked for anything in return. Seeing my children and grandchildren happy and secure was supposed to be reward enough. Or so I convinced myself during those long, exhausting years. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. My help became expected, rather than appreciated. The grateful thank yous became fewer and farther between, then disappeared altogether. My opinions were dismissed as outdated or irrelevant. My concerns were brushed off as me being too old-fashioned or worrying too much about things I didn't understand. The children, now teenagers, barely acknowledged my existence. Tommy would grunt when I asked about his day or how school was going. Emma would roll her eyes dramatically when I offered to help with homework or asked if she wanted to talk about anything. Sweet Lily, my precious granddaughter who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories and tell me I was her favorite person in the whole world, now spent all her time on her phone, barely looking up when I spoke to her. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. Conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room, as if my presence was an unwelcome interruption. Family plans were made without consulting me, even though I was expected to provide transportation, food, or childcare. Important decisions about the children's futures were discussed behind closed doors, and I was informed of the conclusions after the fact. I was expected to be available for babysitting, cooking, cleaning, and financial support at a moment's notice, but my thoughts, feelings, and needs seemed to matter less and less with each passing year. I felt like a servant in my own family, valued only for what I could provide, not for who I was as a person. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening in October, exactly 2 years and 3 months ago. I remember it with crystal clarity because it was the day my entire world crumbled around me, the day I realized I had become completely invisible to the people I loved most. Sarah had called that morning in her typical frantic state. Her usual babysitter had called in sick with the flu, and she had a crucial work dinner with important clients that could lead to a promotion she'd been working toward for months. She needed someone to watch 8-year-old Jake, Emma's son, whom I'd been caring for regularly since Emma started her demanding nursing program at the local community college. I had been looking forward to that evening for weeks. My dear friend Margaret, who had been my closest companion since high school, was battling stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors had given her only a few months to live, and I knew our time together was becoming increasingly precious and limited. We had planned to spend the evening looking through old photo albums, sharing memories, and just being together in whatever time she had left. But family came first. It always came first. I called Margaret with a heavy heart and canceled our plans, promising to visit the next day instead. I assured Sarah I would watch Jake, help him with his school project, make him dinner, and get him ready for bed. The work dinner ran much later than expected. Sarah didn't return until nearly midnight, offering only a hurried "Thanks, Mom," as she scooped up her exhausted son and rushed out the door. I was completely drained, having spent the entire evening helping Jake with a complicated school project about Michigan's automotive history, making him a proper dinner instead of just heating up something frozen, and reading him 3 different bedtime stories because he couldn't fall asleep. I went to bed that night feeling unappreciated and taken for granted, but I told myself that was just my exhaustion talking. I convinced myself that my family loved me, even if they didn't always show it the way I needed them to. The next morning changed everything. I was in the hallway folding a basket of laundry, their laundry, as always, when I heard Sarah talking to Emma on the phone in the kitchen. The house was quiet, and their voices carried clearly through the thin walls. "I don't understand why Mom's always complaining about being tired," Sarah said, her voice filled with irritation and dismissal. "It's not like she has a real job or any actual responsibilities. She just sits around the house all day watching TV and reading those romance novels. Honestly, Emma, she doesn't do anything important. I don't know why she acts like her life is so hard." Those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I actually staggered backward, dropping the laundry basket, clean clothes scattering across the floor. "She doesn't do anything." The phrase echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra. 43 years of sacrifice, of putting everyone else's needs before my own, of giving up my dreams, my independence, my financial security, my friendships, my hobbies, my very identity. All of it reduced to nothing. I stood there in that hallway, surrounded by their clean clothes that I had washed, dried, and folded in a house I helped maintain, after caring for children I helped raise, and realized that I had been completely erased from my own life. I went to my small bedroom and cried harder than I had since the day Harold died. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the dreams I'd abandoned, for the life I'd never lived. I cried for all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no, for all the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed and unappreciated. Then I sat at my old wooden desk, the one Harold had built for me 40 years ago, and began to write. I made a detailed list of everything I had done for my family over the past 20 years. Every meal cooked, every bill paid, every mile driven, every tear wiped away, every problem solved, every crisis managed. The list was 28 pages long, written in my careful handwriting. But more than that, I realized I had lost myself completely. I couldn't remember the last time I had done something just for my own enjoyment. I had given up my weekly book club, my beloved garden, my volunteer work at the animal shelter where I had found so much joy and purpose. I had stopped seeing friends, stopped traveling, stopped dreaming about my own future. I had become a shell of the woman I once was. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to save myself before it was too late. The next morning, I called my nephew David, a successful lawyer in Detroit who had always been kind to me. I asked him to help me find a small apartment, something I could afford on my Social Security and Harold's modest pension. I had been managing our household finances for so long that I knew exactly what I could and couldn't afford. Within 2 weeks, David had found me a perfect little one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community called Sunset Gardens. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was mine. I would have my own space, my own schedule, my own life for the first time in decades. I didn't tell anyone about my plans. Instead, I quietly began the process of reclaiming my life. I spent days sorting through decades of accumulated belongings, keeping only what truly mattered to me. Harold's photographs, my grandmother's china, my favorite books, and a few precious mementos from when my children were young and still appreciated me. I arranged for a moving company to come on a Saturday morning when everyone would be busy with their own activities. Sarah had a soccer tournament with Jake, Michael was taking Lily to visit colleges, and Emma was working a shift at the hospital where she'd recently started as a nurse. I left a carefully written letter for Sarah and Michael on the kitchen table, next to a plate of chocolate chip cookies I'd made one last time. The letter wasn't angry or accusatory, though I certainly had every right to be both. Instead, I simply explained that I needed to live my own life while I still could. I told them I loved them all deeply, but I couldn't continue to sacrifice my own well-being and happiness for people who saw my contributions as worthless. I wrote about how I had spent the best years of my life giving everything I had to give, only to be told that I do nothing. I explained that I deserved to be valued, respected, and appreciated, not taken for granted and dismissed. I told them that I hoped they would eventually understand that my leaving wasn't about punishing them, but about saving myself. The phone calls started within hours of them finding the letter. Sarah was absolutely hysterical, alternating between tears and anger. She demanded to know how I could abandon them, how I could be so selfish and cruel. She listed all the ways they still needed me, all the responsibilities I was abandoning. But nowhere in her emotional tirade did she acknowledge how they had treated me, or apologize for the hurtful words I had overheard. Michael was even angrier. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, of throwing away everything he had done for me over the years. When I asked him what exactly he had done for me, he couldn't give me a specific answer. He just kept saying that family was supposed to stick together, that I was supposed to be there for them no matter what. The grandchildren were confused and hurt. They suddenly needed me desperately, now that I was no longer available at their beck and call. Tommy called crying, saying he was sorry for being mean to me, that he needed help with his college applications. Emma promised to spend more time with me if I would just come back home. Even Lily, who hadn't voluntarily spoken to me in months, left tearful voicemails begging me to reconsider. I listened to all their words, their promises to change, their desperate pleas for me to come back. But I also heard what they didn't say. No acknowledgement of how they had treated me, no real understanding of what I had given up for them, no genuine remorse for making me feel worthless and invisible. The first few months in my new apartment were the hardest I had ever experienced. I was lonely in a way that felt crushing, but I was also free for the first time in decades. I could eat dinner at 6 o'clock instead of waiting until 9 for everyone else's schedules. I could watch the television programs I enjoyed instead of cartoons or sports. I could go to bed early and wake up refreshed instead of staying up late cleaning up after everyone else. Slowly, tentatively, I began to rediscover the woman I had been before I became everyone else's solution to their problems. I joined a book club at the local library and remembered how much I loved discussing literature and sharing thoughts with other intelligent women. I started a small container garden on my apartment balcony, growing tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that I used in my own cooking and decorating. I began volunteering at the animal shelter again, finding incredible joy in caring for abandoned creatures who appreciated my attention and affection. The cats didn't care that I was 75 years old, and the dogs were thrilled to see me every time I walked through the door. Their unconditional love helped heal my wounded heart. I made new friends, other women who understood the complex mixture of love and resentment that comes with complicated family relationships. We supported each other through difficult transitions, celebrated small victories, and shared quiet sorrows. For the first time in years, I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. Margaret passed away 5 months after I moved out. I was able to spend her final weeks by her side, holding her hand, sharing memories, and helping her family navigate the difficult process of letting go. I couldn't have done that if I had still been tied to everyone else's constant needs and demands. Her death reminded me that life is precious and finite, that we can't spend all our time waiting for others to value us. The first Christmas in my new apartment was the most difficult day I had experienced since Harold's death. I woke up in my quiet apartment, made coffee for one, and sat by my small Christmas tree looking at the few presents I had bought for myself. I had spent every Christmas for the past 20 years cooking elaborate meals, buying gifts, and orchestrating celebrations for my family. Now I was alone, and the silence felt overwhelming. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: peace. I didn't have to worry about anyone else's expectations or demands. I could spend the day exactly as I wanted, without criticism or complaint. I made a beautiful breakfast for myself, watched old movies, and called a few friends. It wasn't the Christmas I had imagined, but it was mine. Spring brought unexpected joy and hope into my life. I met Walter Morrison at the community garden where I had started volunteering. He was a 78-year-old widower with kind eyes, a gentle sense of humor, and dirty hands from working in the soil. We bonded over our shared love of growing things and our similar experiences with demanding adult children who had forgotten how to appreciate their parents. Walter had also learned the hard way that setting boundaries with family was essential for survival. He understood my pain and my healing journey in a way that felt miraculous. We spent hours talking about books, sharing memories of our late spouses, and planning small adventures, day trips to Lake Michigan, visits to art museums, quiet dinners at local restaurants where we could talk without interruption. Being with Walter reminded me that I was still a woman with desires, dreams, and the capacity for love. I had spent so many years focused on everyone else's needs that I had forgotten I had needs of my own. Walter appreciated my intelligence, my humor, my opinions, and my company. He made me feel valuable and interesting again. Slowly, carefully, I began to remember who Dorothy Henderson was before she became everyone else's caretaker. I was a woman with strong opinions about books and politics. I was intelligent, capable, and worthy of respect. I had interests beyond my family's problems. I deserved to be loved for who I was, not just for what I could provide. The relationship with my family evolved slowly and painfully over the following months. Emma was the first to truly understand what had happened and why I had needed to leave. She came to my apartment 8 months after I moved out, not to beg me to return, but to apologize. She sat on my small couch and cried as she told me how much she missed having me in her life, not as a babysitter or cook, but as her grandmother. She said she had been thinking about all the sacrifices I had made for her education, all the times I had been there when she needed support, all the ways I had shown her what strength looked like. She admitted that she had taken me for granted and promised to do better. Emma and I began building a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. She visited regularly, bringing Jake to spend time with me because he wanted to, not because she needed free childcare. We talked about her dreams, her struggles, her hopes for the future. She asked for my advice and actually listened to my answers. Michael took much longer to come around. His pride was deeply hurt, and he struggled to understand why I had chosen my own happiness over his convenience. He felt abandoned and betrayed, unable to see that I had been the one who was abandoned and betrayed first. But gradually, as months passed, he began to see me as more than just a resource he could use. He started calling regularly, asking about my life, my new friends, my activities. He brought Lily to visit, and we talked about her hopes for college, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her boyfriend troubles. These conversations were different from before. He was genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. Sarah was the most resistant to change and the most difficult to forgive. She felt utterly betrayed and abandoned, unable to understand that I had needed to save myself from disappearing completely. She struggled to manage her household without my constant help, and part of me wanted to rescue her from the consequences she needed to face. But I had learned that rescuing people from their own choices wasn't love. It was enabling. Sarah needed to learn how to appreciate the help she received, how to say thank you, how to recognize that other people had value beyond their usefulness to her. Our relationship remained strained but civil. We spoke occasionally, always awkwardly, both of us trying to navigate this new dynamic. I sent birthday cards to her children and attended major events when invited, but I was no longer the constantly available support system she had taken for granted. The grandchildren adapted to our new relationship better than I had expected. Tommy, now 23, began visiting me regularly at my apartment. He brought his girlfriend Rebecca to meet me and asked for my advice about his future career plans. He told me he finally understood all the sacrifices I had made for his education and felt ashamed of how he had treated me during his teenage years. "Grandma," he said one afternoon as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, "I never realized how much you did for us. I was so selfish and ungrateful. I'm sorry it took me so long to grow up and see what was right in front of me." His apology meant more to me than he could ever know. Hearing him acknowledge my contributions and express genuine remorse for taking me for granted helped heal wounds I wasn't sure would ever fully close. Lily, now 18 and preparing for college, became one of my most frequent visitors. She would come over on Sunday afternoons, and we would cook together, work in my garden, or just sit and talk about everything and nothing. She told me about her boyfriend, her fears about the future, her excitement about studying education. "I want to be a teacher like you were before you had to take care of all of us," she said one day. "I want to help kids learn and grow. You taught me that taking care of people is important, but you also taught me that taking care of yourself is important too." Jake, now 10 years old, became my special gardening companion. He loved helping me plant seeds, water the vegetables, and harvest what we had grown together. Emma would bring him over on Saturday mornings, and we would spend hours working in the community garden, talking about school, friends, and life. "Grandma Dorothy," he said one morning as we picked tomatoes, "I'm sorry Mom used to just drop me off and leave. I like it better when we choose to spend time together because we want to." His innocent wisdom reminded me why I had needed to make such a difficult choice. Children are incredibly perceptive, and Jake understood that our relationship was healthier when it was based on mutual affection rather than obligation. A year and a half after I moved out, I made a decision that surprised everyone in my family, including myself. I met with David and changed my will completely. Instead of leaving everything to my children as I had originally planned, I designated specific amounts for each grandchild's education, donated a substantial portion to the animal shelter where I volunteered, and set aside money for the community garden project. I wanted my legacy to reflect my values and the things that had brought me joy in my final years, not just my biological connections. My children would inherit something, but they would not inherit everything simply because they were my children. They would need to earn their inheritance through their treatment of me and others. I also made another dream come true that year. Walter and I took a trip to Ireland, something I had wanted to do since I was a young woman reading about Irish history and culture. We spent 3 weeks exploring the countryside, visiting ancient castles, drinking tea in cozy pubs, and walking along dramatic coastlines. I felt more alive during those 3 weeks than I had in the previous 20 years. Every sunrise was a gift, every new sight was a treasure, every moment was mine to enjoy. I wasn't worried about anyone else's schedule or needs. I was simply Dorothy, a woman exploring the world with a man who appreciated her company. We took hundreds of photographs, collected memories, and talked about plans for future adventures. Walter proposed to me on the cliffs of Moher, with the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly before us. I said yes, not because I needed to be married, but because I wanted to share my life with someone who valued me completely. The second year in my apartment brought even deeper healing and transformation. I learned to forgive my family for taking me for granted, understanding that I had played a role in creating the dynamic by never setting boundaries or demanding respect. I had taught them that my needs didn't matter by always putting their needs first. I also learned to forgive myself for losing my identity in their problems and demands. I had been doing the best I could with the knowledge and tools I had at the time. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to move forward. Family relationships slowly began to heal, but on completely different terms than before. I was invited to family dinners as a guest, not expected as a servant. I brought dishes I wanted to make, participated in conversations that interested me, and left when I was ready. The entire dynamic had shifted, and everyone was learning to navigate these new, healthier relationships. Emma's graduation from nursing school was one of the most meaningful days of my new life. I sat in the auditorium watching her walk across the stage, wearing the beautiful dress I had bought for the occasion. She had worked so hard for this achievement, balancing school, work, and motherhood with incredible determination. During her speech as class valedictorian, she thanked her family for their support, but she specifically mentioned me in a way that brought tears to my eyes. I want to thank my grandmother, Dorothy Henderson, who taught me that education is valuable, that hard work pays off, and that it's never too late to start over and chase your dreams. Grandma, you showed me what strength looks like, and I love you. Sitting there listening to her words, I felt proud not just of her accomplishment, but of my own growth and courage. I had modeled strength and self-respect for my granddaughter, and she had learned the lesson I had taken 73 years to understand. Michael's relationship with me continued to evolve as well. He met a wonderful woman named Patricia, a widow with grown children of her own who understood the complexities of blended families. Patricia made genuine efforts to include me in family activities without expecting me to provide free labor or childcare. She would call to invite me to dinner, ask my opinion on decorating choices, and treat me like a valued member of the family rather than a convenience. I appreciated her kindness and began to hope that Michael had finally found someone who would love and respect him appropriately. During one of our regular phone calls, Michael said something that showed me how much he had grown and changed. Mom, I'm sorry it took me so long to realize how much you had given up for us. Patricia helped me see that I was treating you like a resource instead of a person. I hope you can forgive me for being so selfish and demanding. His apology was sincere and heartfelt, and I could hear the genuine remorse in his voice. We talked for over an hour that day, really talked, about his childhood, his struggles, his hopes for the future. It was the kind of conversation we should have been having for years. Now, as I sit here writing this letter on a beautiful spring morning, I'm 75 years old and happier than I have been in decades. Walter and I have been married for 6 months, and we're planning another adventure to Scotland this fall. We have a small but comfortable life together, two people who enhance each other's happiness without demanding the sacrifice of individual identity. I still help my family when I choose to, but always on my own terms. I babysit Jake when I want to spend time with him, not when Emma needs emergency childcare. I offer advice when asked, not when I think it's needed. I contribute to family celebrations as a participant, not as the person responsible for everyone else's happiness. My apartment is filled with books, plants, and photographs of adventures I've taken. I have season tickets to the community theater with Walter, and we belong to a hiking group for seniors. I've learned to use a computer and email regularly with old friends who moved away years ago. I'm taking watercolor painting classes and discovering I have a talent for capturing the beauty I see around me. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life and demand the respect you deserve. At 73, I thought my story was nearly over, that I had missed my chance for happiness and fulfillment. Instead, I discovered that I was just beginning the most authentic and satisfying chapter of my entire life. To other grandmothers, mothers, and women who might be reading this, your value isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others. You are worthy of love, respect, and consideration simply because you exist. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. Your life matters just as much as anyone else's. Don't wait for others to recognize your worth. Recognize it yourself and live accordingly. Don't allow yourself to become invisible in your own life. Speak up, set boundaries, and demand to be treated with the dignity you deserve. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy and whole. Teaching others to value you starts with valuing yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to show them how to be strong, independent, and self-respecting. I still love my family deeply, but I love myself too. That balance has made all the difference in my happiness and in the quality of my relationships. They love me better now because I taught them how to love me properly. My story isn't unique, but it is mine. And for the first time in my life, I am truly, completely proud of how it's unfolding. I am no longer the woman who accepted being taken for granted. I am Dorothy Mae Henderson, and I finally know my worth. The sun is setting now over Grand Rapids, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Walter will be home soon from his volunteer work at the Literacy Center, and we'll sit on our balcony sharing stories from our day. Tomorrow, I'm volunteering at the animal shelter. And this weekend, Emma and I are going antiquing together, just the two of us, grandmother and granddaughter, enjoying each other's company. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer taken for granted. I am Dorothy, and I do everything that matters for the life I've chosen to live. With love and hope for your own journey towards self-respect and happiness, Dorothy Mae Henderson, P.S. Last week, Sarah called to ask if I would consider helping with Jake's science fair project. When I hesitated, she quickly added, "Of course, only if you want to, Mom. I know how busy you are with your own life, and I don't want to impose on your time." I smiled and said yes, because now helping is my choice, not my obligation. And that simple shift in dynamic has made all the difference in our relationship and in my happiness.